only place for everything Vikings. 6, 1, 2, Vikings.
Welcome back to 612 Vikings. I am your host, Dustin, alongside Drew, as always. And before we get into what we're going to talk about today, Drew, how are we feeling about today? Before we get into what we're about to talk about, but how are we feeling otherwise?
Doing good. Football season's coming around. We got our last preseason game. That's always something to be happy about. We got regular season ball coming up, and this year's a little bit more exciting than years past, just because we got a division rivalry, for week one for the matchup. So those are always fun with the lead up to those versus just beating up on like the Giants like last year. So you get a little banter back and forth amongst the division rivals, especially one as competitive as this. So it's definitely exciting for week one and just around the corner.
Oh yeah, it's super fun. It's fun that we get a division rival week one. A couple years ago we had the Packers. I can't remember the last time we had the Lions as a week one game, whether that was here or there. But, it'd be cool one of these years to get Detroit as our week one schedule. But other than that, we are kind of late to the Harrison Phillips trade. And we'll kind of get into all the details and everything about Harrison Phillips. But I just didn't get to record an episode last night. We were kind of half and half waiting to see if the Vikings would get a wide receiver today, because that's been talking about too. But so Harrison Phillips traded to the New York Jets. So the Vikings received from the Jets a 2026 6th-round pick and a 2027 6th-round pick. And then the Jets get, obviously, Harrison Phillips and a 2027 7th-round pick. So 2 6th-round picks for the Vikings, 1 7th-round pick for the Jets and Harrison Phillips. Drew, what's kind of your take on trading a guy like Harrison Phillips, a guy that is loved in the locker room, a pretty solid player on that defensive line? Maybe he was kind of like the odd man out in that defensive line, that front seven.
Yeah, I think this will probably be the surprise transaction from the season. There's always the one guy that either gets cut and it's like, oh, wow, that's a surprise, or even a guy that gets traded. It looks like that's Harrison Phillips this year. So, it's kind of weird because I'm driving home and, just having a normal day. And I didn't even look at like Twitter or anything like that. I just see a YouTube caption and it says Harrison Phillips traded to the Jets. I was like, well, maybe it's like one of those like fake YouTube accounts.
Little clickbait.
Yeah, little clickbait things. Like I see one all the time. So it's like TJ Watt to the Minnesota Vikings. I'm like, he didn't get traded to the Vikings. Just the way to click on the video. So I thought it was like one of those videos. And I was like, oh no, it actually happened. I was like, what do we get? So I'm listening to it and I was like, we got like a 6 and a 6. I'm like, it's kind of like, I was thinking maybe like we get like a 4 or something, because he is like a solid player. But
yeah,
like I said, it sounds like they are really in love with this interior defensive line room. With, I wasn't really that high on Ingram Dawkins coming in the draft, but apparently he's been doing really well from them. I guess from reports. I'll take full accountability there, but we'll see how it works out on the field. And then Elijah Williams, the preseason star. We had a couple of them last year with Jalen Redmond. I think he was the number 1 graded run defender in the preseason, and then Taki Taimani, who was very highly graded as well. So, I think that just solidifies even further. I think Elijah Williams will end up making this roster. So, goes from not even as a priority UDFA on a tryout, and then making the 53-man roster. So we can kind of talk about maybe a similar storyline with that, with another player that might be coming to the Vikings and later on this episode.
Yeah. Harrison Phillips, I didn't think he would be like a trade candidate. I really thought with him on the 2025 Vikings that this would be a really good depth group. Our defensive line would be pretty stacked. More of a run defender than a pass rusher, obviously, but I think the Vikings are still pretty deep on their defensive line. I mean, you got Hargrave, you got Allen, Ingram Dawkins, Elijah Williams, some other guys mixed in there as well, but Harrison Phillips, a very solid player on and off the field. A very good guy, good in the community as well. A lot of charity work, stuff like that for the Vikings. So I think the Jets, they're going to get a good guy, good locker room guy, good player, everything like that. I think he's almost 30 years old. I want to say 28, 29, somewhere around there. But Pair him up with Quinnen Williams. I think that's a pretty solid line as well for the Jets.
Yeah, I think honestly, you kind of look back and you kind of like manifest to try to understand the why. I think that's kind of what a lot of fans want to see is like why, like what's the path, what's the rationale for it. I think the only one like I was really kind of coming back to was is he's one of the higher paid players going into next year, and we mentioned earlier on the previous episode that the Vikings I think they're going to be in the biggest hole cap wise going into next year. I think they're projected like $50 million. So I think a lot of that is, because the Jefferson contract, the Darisaw contracts are kicking in, and the Hawkinson contracts kicking in too. So all the players they've paid the previous years are starting to kick in, and now all these free agent signings too, accounting for that as well. So, with him being, a top 10 highest paid player, do we seriously look at Harrison Phillips as a top 10 player on this team? I would probably say no. And you take that $9 million savings now versus next year and having to spend that dead money to kind of overlap that. So you're trying to save any possible, any little nickels and dimes and little breadcrumbs you can get. So easier to bite the bullet now when you have, now 30 plus million in cap space. So, if you get, depending on who we pick up in this wide receiver thing, if it's like a Thielen or a Tinsley, depending on how much that contract kicks over, it may not be as bad as, a site like Over the Cap says it says 50 million because that 20 million, $30 million will roll over to next year. So it won't be as bad and a little bit more manageable. So I think that's kind of more like the why of we got to where we got. And then also, like Mike said earlier, the depth pieces are playing really well. And it's easier to keep these younger players on cheaper contracts that are going to play well instead of just having a guy that's just stopping you from getting these younger guys for cheap on the field.
Yeah, it kind of segues perfectly into what we're going to talk about with the wide receivers. And this move that the Vikings make, they don't just make this not planning something else. I think this is definitely move one of two. So, it frees up some money. The Vikings, I think, save what, $3 or $4 million in their cap for in their cap space. So, it does trading for a guy like Adam Thielen. If you're going to bite the bullet on that, he's not going to be super cheap, but you're going to take on at least some of that contract, and that kind of gives you some wiggle room in a guy like that. But some wide receivers that the Vikings could trade for. Thielen, I think, is the pretty obvious one that, a lot of people would want. We'll get more on Thielen, but some other guys too. Chris Olave, I don't know. I'm not a huge Chris Olave trade for candidate right now, just because he's a really good, I'll say he's a good wide receiver one, a really good wide receiver two, but he's not a wide receiver three in my eyes. When Addison comes back, who are you gonna really quote unquote demote as your wide receiver three? I mean, they all can be on the field at the same time. Kevin O'Connell likes to run that offense a lot, but they're going to have to share some snaps, share some packages, stuff like that. I mean, would I love Chris Olave on the Vikings? Yes, I would love that. Other guys like Tyreek Hill, that's kind of like an outlandish trade candidate as well. And then Mitchell Tinsley of the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm not super high on that one either. I don't know. He's makes one good play in the preseason. I don't watch film on him or anything, but the one good play I see in preseason he makes, and then everybody's all kind of rah-rah over him. But I don't know. What's your takes on at least those four guys?
Yeah, I think with Thielen, I think it's the easiest bridge or the easiest gap to have a guy ready to go for week one where, you have a little bit of a time between week 3 and then going into week 1. So, because Adam Thielen knows the system, he knows what is expected out of Kevin O'Connell. So I think that would be the easiest transition. And I think a lot of it is just going to be what we can get out of these teams, how much are we going to be willing to give up. If it's giving up that 6th round pick we got for Harrison Phillips for an Adam Thielen, just kind of manipulating this trade market, maybe that's the way they go for it. I think that's kind of how I look at it as the easiest transition, especially for a critical game week 1, because the divisional games, whether they're good or bad, always a critical game when you play divisional opponents, so can't take those for granted. So I think that was one. And then I think the Chris Olave one's interesting. I think that one would be – I think with the Saints, I think if you look at it, if he doesn't want to be extended for New Orleans, and given his injury history, I think that's also a possibility that he doesn't get like a huge extension because he has a lot of concussions. And I know you mentioned too, like where are you going to play him, who's going to get demoted, and I think it would be Chris Olave at the wide receiver 3, just to kind of put him on like a snap count, just because he has all the histories of the concussions and the injuries. So not like less is, but I feel like in that scenario, like less is more with him. So like just using them efficiently in those right moments. So and then you can kind of like platoon Josh Oliver, Chris Olave. I think that'd be an interesting option as well. And then Tinsley is like, I think that's kind of, I don't know how old he is. I think he's like 25, if I remember correctly. He's been in the league for a few years. I just don't. I think in that scenario, I think I'd rather just roll the dice with somebody who's actually been in the system, knows what they're doing. It looks like Ty Felton's going to be okay, so you'll still have him. Jalen Naylor's probably the biggest question mark, but like I think in that scenario, I think I'd rather just roll out Thayer Thomas than a guy like Tinsley, just because I feel like they're somewhat similar right now. Like as we can look back hindsight and be like, oh, you were wrong on that, but I think it's easier for those week one. I think you got to play the week one matchup and then just kind of figure out week 2 and week 3. I think a guy like Thayer Thomas is going to be more ready to go week 1 than a guy like Mitchell Tinsley, who's not like a Olave or a Tyreek Hill kind of player, or at least proven to be so.
Yeah, I'm looking at Mitchell Tinsley's career stats, and he has nothing on the record books. I mean, he started, I guess played in 2 games, didn't even start a game. So he's kind of like maybe a high upside type of player, but yeah, there's no stats on him, 0 catches, 0 targets, stuff like that. So, is that a guy you really want to, I don't want to say like trade capital for, but a guy that you want to take a risk on, a 7th round flyer on him. Preseason is where you're going to see the most amount of action for him. And I don't know if he really plays that wide receiver 2 or 3, if he's quite ready for that yet, because I don't know where he's buried on that Bengals depth chart, but I am pretty sure it's more towards the bottom than it is the top. So with that said, Adam Thielen, I kind of tweeted this as well, I'm not a big Adam Thielen return guy. I like Adam Thielen. I don't know if the Vikings should trade for him because he's going to be 35 years old. He's slower. He has good hands. I'll give him that. But, like, he's getting a couple leg injuries, like the hamstrings, stuff like that. You kind of like the old people injuries. So, I don't know. I'm not a real big Adam Thielen comeback, on that agenda, but I don't know. How are you feeling about Adam Thielen coming back?
Yeah, I know, like, the big it's kind of split. Like, I think the people who are trying to look at things objectively are saying, he's 34, he's going to be 35, which, definitely is something because your body can only do so much, and he's definitely on the decline health-wise, like physically. Even though he hasn't played really much football, like the starting level till like 26, 20, 25, 26 years old. Yep. So, maybe that he doesn't have the football hits, which is, I guess, a big plus in his column because he did kind of break out and start getting significant snaps so late. But I think the interesting thing is with him is his style of play, the way he kind of approaches it is very similar to like a Larry Fitzgerald. He's a possession guy, or like a Chris Carter. He's not going to blow you away with the speed or the agility, the quick cut ability like a Justin Jefferson or Devontae Adams. He's just a very smart player, kind of similar like Cooper Kupp a little bit, where he knows what to see on the defense and he knows what to do, and he can just just take advantage of whatever the defense is showing. So, and with a guy who has hands like that, it's I don't know if age is really the biggest concern in that, or because hands is something that you can't take away, no matter how old you get. Your hands will always be there. Speed can go down, or the agility can go down, but those hands and the IQs, that's something that that never regresses. So I think that's something that could be interesting for that. I think it's just going to come down to what the Panthers are willing to take, and I think the Vikings are just going to try to say, here's the lowest offer, take a 6th round pick for what we just got for Harrison Phillips. So you get a pick swap and Adam Thielen, which I don't think is the worst thing in the world. But like I say, it's just going to depend on what Carolina really is willing to take. Anything more than a 6, I would look elsewhere.
Yeah, so like going to like the Larry Fitzgerald comparison, I mean, Larry, he played till he was 35, 36 years old, when he retired in 2020. So that's kind of, interesting because he was still, I guess effective would be like the right word, but it's also not at the same time. You could still get the ball to him, still reliable. I don't know if the whole more catches than drops thing was real or tackles, whatever it was, but it's pretty interesting that Thielen, without the hits on his body, kind of had that later start to his career, mostly a special teams guy, and then kind of really got going in 2016, 2017. Still has those sure hands, still a pretty decent route runner too. More of kind of like your red zone route running guy. So I don't know. It would be interesting. I guess I would welcome it to a degree, but I wouldn't be super thrilled with it. But other than that, is there any other guys kind of on your radar that the Vikings should target, at least trade-wise? I know there's a couple free agents, but I don't know if the Vikings go in the free agent bin this year.
Yeah, like a lot of people are trying to float Terry McLaurin, and I just don't think it's going to happen. So I think what the drawback is with like a guy like Tyreek Hill and a Terry McLaurin is, well, for Terry, you have to pay him, and you're going to have to pay him $30+ million. So to invest $60+ million on a wide receiver core, I feel like is kind of reckless, where you can kind of maneuver that money elsewhere for other players that are potentially about to get paid. The good thing is though, with you could dunk on Kwesi on his 2022 draft class, but since everyone really there isn't really the star player there, it's kind of money you don't really have to pay anyone else. So I guess if there's a silver lining out of it, you got something there. But for a guy like Tyreek, you would save a lot of money this year, but next year that's where that money really kicks in, where he's owed like $50+ million, like an insane amount. And with the money that you're already, I mentioned earlier how much money you're going to be in debt for next year, I think I just don't see it happening as much as, unless he's willing to renegotiate a deal for something cheap. That's, neither here or there. But I think that's kind of like the big names that are out there. Another couple of guys I've been seeing is like Darius Slayton for the Giants. I know there's been like always talks about him moving, and Curtis Samuel is another guy too from the Buffalo Bills.
Alec Pierce too, I think.
Alec Pierce is another one. Yeah, I've seen a couple of them. Alec Pierce could be interesting because he grew up in the Chicagoland area. He went to Glenbard West, so somewhere in the area of where J.J. McCarthy went to high school. So I'm sure they probably played against each other at some point. So, I think those are kind of names that are just kind of interesting out there. But, maybe Curtis Samuel could be an interesting one, just because you kind of would have that, gadget kind of player, because he can be a guy that can kind of line up in the backfield and play in the slot and play, kind of a little bit of everywhere. And then another one, I know you mentioned earlier you're a big fan of, and I was actually just about to mention that, is Romeo Doubs from the Packers. But I think for a guy like Doubs, I don't think it would have to be a trade. I think it would have to be a situation where Green Bay cuts him and then you pick him up. And that's very likely a scenario that could happen with Romeo Doubs, because I know there's been some issues with him. I think he got suspended last year or something. I can't remember what it was for. It was something like similar. Wasn't it like something similar to Jair, where it's like let me
look it up.
It's something where he missed a game or something along those lines. But I think that would be an interesting one too, because I think he's only 25 years old, 26, somewhere in that ballpark.
Conduct detrimental to the team.
Yeah, so it was the same thing that
was.
Jair got nicked on when he went out for the halftime thing. So my guess is he probably he whether went off on somebody, missed a practice or something along those lines. But I think that'd be probably most interesting one, because then you can kind of pick the brain of Dobbs and just see kind of what Green Bay's been looking at and practicing, what they've really been honing in on, and that's something you can kind of try to exploit going against LaFleur. So I think that's something that could get really, really interesting too, because to be fair, I think the Vikings have really kind of had Green Bay's number the last, in the Kevin O'Connell era. I think they're 4-2 against them, if I'm correct.
Yes, 4-2.
Yeah, but we won't count the 2023 one because that was against a backup. So it's that's like beating up the kid that can't run, the kid that runs the third base, and you're flexing on that you can hit a ball farther than them. So it's kind of like that. Yeah. So, I think those are just some names that are currently on rosters that the Vikings could be looking at within the trade market that are currently employed there.
Yeah, before we get to this one here too, Romeo Dobbs. I've been a big Romeo Dobbs guy, even though he is on the Packers. But the Packers have a lot of good wide receiver threes on their team, and one of them is even starting. Jaden Reed, and then you got Christian Watson, and then Romeo Dobbs, and then Dontavian Wicks. Some good guys in there, some good wide receivers. So I think Romeo Dobbs, if he is a free agent, I think you gotta pick up the phone, no matter who you trade for. I think Romeo Dobbs is a very good receiver. Do I think he's top 10? No, but I think he fits on what you're trying to do. Good number 2, solid number 3, stuff like that. So Tyler Boyd, I don't want to spend too much time on this one, but did he play last year? Was he a Titan last year, or did he skip out?
No, I think he played for the Titans last year. He kind of went with was it Brian Callahan? I think was their coach over there. So
Yeah.
stuck around there, but right now he's just been kind of in limbo in free agency, and he really wasn't like the number one receiver there either. He was kind of like playing half the games over there. So I don't know. He's getting older too. He's in his early 30s. I think this is just kind of where you start to see a little bit of a decline. As I know, like the big thing with him is I think he had like 1 or 2 really good seasons with Cincinnati. Then they drafted T. Higgins, and then that was really it after that. And they just kind of put up a couple 800-yard years where they had a good trio for a couple years, and that was really it. So,
Yep.
I think the big fish in free agency is going to be Amari Cooper, but I think it's just going to depend on how much he's going to be asking for. Is he going to be asking for $20 plus million a year? Who knows? But like I said, I think if you really want to wait, you can wait it out and see with Amari and just be like, hey, season's about to start. Give you a 1-year deal and kind of a prove it year and see if you can get something next year from another team if you really ball out. So maybe I think something like 1 year in the teens I think would be a really good contract that you can give out where you're really building for a wide receiver trio and you're really cushioning JJ. And I think if they do make that move, I think things would get really, really interesting there.
Yeah, before we kind of round this episode out too, is a lot of people compare Amari Cooper to Adam Thielen in age, and Adam Thielen is full whole years, almost 5, older than Amari Cooper. So that's still a decent age gap that Amari Cooper still has tread on the tires. Is he the same guy that he was in Oakland and Dallas? Not really, but it's still a guy that is a really good route runner. I think he's pretty similar to what Jordan Addison brings in that possession kind of route running ability. But within 2 weeks, it's kind of hard to learn a whole playbook. A guy that's not super familiar with the system, and that's anybody that the Vikings bring in that's not Adam Thielen or someone from the Rams or the 49ers, that kind of system. But other than that, I wouldn't be. I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of curious on who the Vikings would bring in that is not named Adam Thielen. How good, how productive can they be? What are they looking for? Just kind of stuff like that, because it doesn't seem like they're really digging in the free agency bin. They want to trade for somebody, and I think if you're going to trade for somebody, you want to do it with someone that is a good production player. Someone maybe on the younger side, between 24 to like maybe 27ish, 28, somewhere around there. But I don't know, maybe it is Adam Thielen. We've seen a lot of Adam Thielen steam the past day or two, so I don't know, maybe we get Detroit Lakes man back. So
yeah, I think the thing that really sucks with this whole thing is the Juwan Jennings one. I think would have been the perfect fit, but he's dealing with the calf injury now, and given what the NBA's been dealing with calf strains and etc., I think a lot of teams are going to be hesitant to really pick up the phone on him because you look at San Francisco, they had Pearsall, who was a first-round pick for him, and and obviously Brandon Ayuk, who just got paid big money. I mean, he really is kind of a default wide receiver 3, and they just picked up Sky Moore in a trade, so that wide receiver room is starting to fill out a little bit over there too. If they were healthy and everyone was fully healthy, I think that's the thing that stinks with it. Then because I think that system would have translated well over where there wasn't too much of a learning curve from going from a Shanahan to a McVay O'Connell style offense. So I think that's the thing that's what makes it really difficult in the trade bin right now, is trying to find somebody who can be high value but isn't going to cost an arm and a leg to get.
Yep. Real quick before we end, too, this comment was shown earlier. I didn't really understand what was going on with it. I thought it was like his Twitter account, but he's actually inactive for the game tonight for the Panthers. So, I think that was kind of going to happen. I don't think Adam Thielen was going to play in a third preseason game. He doesn't really need to, but I don't know. That's kind of interesting too. Maybe he has some Unreal gear on. Some Vikings Unreal, but. Other than that, let's see who the Vikings bring in. Maybe the next couple days we'll see some. Maybe it's tonight. Maybe it's in 2 days. Who knows? Maybe it's somebody like Adam Thielen. So, with that said, let me know in the comments below who you guys think the Vikings will bring in for that wide receiver spot. All right. So, with that said, we'll see you guys in the next episode in Skull Vikes.